1996, 186 countries came together at the United Nations to discuss how they could eradicate hunger, especially as it relates to agricultural production in those countries. And during that time, nutrition and the emphasis on food was not as prominent as it is today, but it was an excellent beginning. And then in the 2000s, September as a matter of fact, there was a United Nations conference in New York where they came up with a United Nations Millennium Declaration. And they identified 8 United Nations Millennial Development Goals. And I'm not going to enumerate those goals, but I'll give you some key phrases. For Millennial Goal 1, it was the eradication of poverty. 2 was primary education. 3 was gender equality. 4 was child mortality. 5 was maternal health. 6 was combat diseases. 7 was education for environmental sustainability, education for sustainable development, and then finally, a global partnership for development. These goals have been used as a barometer from 1996, where they decided that they wanted to decrease the amount of individuals who were hungry in the world, and then to have others to join them, non-governmental organizations, governmental organization, or whoever was interested. Even an academician as myself, who majored in home economics and then did further study in food and nutrition, which is very appropriate for our discussion today. So when we look at what they did during that time, it is right within my purview of what needs to be done in terms of eradicating hunger. And the Food and Agriculture Organization states in the State of Food Insecurity in the World Report in 2004 that the grim tally of human lives cut short or scarred by disability leaves no doubt that hunger is morally unacceptable. What is very clear is that poverty contributes to hunger and food insecurity. Now, I have a lot of information, but I'm going to be selective due to time. My focus is on the poorest of the poor, and that is women and children. And I'll give you just a few statistics. There are 805 million people in the world who do not have enough food to lead a healthy, active life. That's about 1 in 9 people on earth. If you take into consideration the poorest of the poor, which is women and children, poor nutrition causes death in nearly half, or 45%, of children under the age of 5. 1 out of 6 children, which is roughly 100 million in developing countries, are underweight. And believe it or not, there are some who suffer with obesity also. So when we talk about malnutrition, we're talking about a lack of nutrients in some instances, and then too many calories that would lead to obesity, and then a lack of macronutrients, which would lead to diseases and or conditions that are important for people to live and grow. In developing countries, the proportion of children who are stunted in growth can rise from 1 in 3. There are approximately 66 million primary school-aged children who attend classes hungry across the developing world, with 23 million in Africa alone. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, this business of hunger is not in isolation. Not only does it exist in America, but it exists in other countries. And I want to focus on 3 particular countries. You heard it earlier that Asia is the continent with the most hungry people. 2/3 of the total. The percentage in Southern Asia has fallen, but in Western Asia it has increased slightly. In Northern Africa, there has been a consistently low prevalence of hunger at less than 5%. However, Sub-Saharan Africa is the region with the highest prevalence of hunger. 1 person in 4 there is undernourished. Reversing this trend is the greatest challenge and requires transforming into concrete progress the growing political will in the region, shown by the commitment made at the African Union Summit to end hunger in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost there in some instances with some countries, and then in other countries we are still struggling. Latin America and the Caribbean is the region that has shown the greatest progress in hunger reduction, with the prevalence of hunger reduced by about 2/3 since the early 1990s. As a whole, it has already reached the millennial goal, which is to reduce hunger by 1/2. Government-led efforts combining support with social protection have been supported by much wider commitment. Societies have decided to end hunger. Parliaments are taking responsibility. National efforts have been pushed forward by the strong commitment of the region as a whole. And then, of course, we have non-governmental organizations and foundations like the Melinda Gates and that famous husband of hers who is contributing to the fight against hunger. Now, the Food and Agriculture Organization identified a twin-track strategy enumerating the causes and the consequences of poverty and hunger. The first track included interventions for improving personal income and food availability, for the poor by strengthening income-generating opportunities. The second track supplies a safety net to provide direct assistance to the most vulnerable groups, which includes pregnant and lactating women, infants and children, school children, unemployed urban youth, older adults, disabled persons, the sick, including people living with HIV or AIDS. And so when we look at these 2 tracks, again, we can't help but look at the poorest of the poor, which are women and children. And so today, my focus in terms of policies would relate to those gender issues, which these issues quite often are not mentioned in most of your national and regional agricultural and food security papers on issues. And they are relegated to separate chapters on women rather than treated as an integral part of policy and programming. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, we do not live in isolation. What affects one of us affects the other, and especially as it relates to satisfying the basic human needs. There are some key points that I would like to make from a report, and I'm going to just take just a few minutes. That report was prepared by the Food and Agriculture Organization during the year 2010 to 2011. And these are some of the key messages that report contained. The first thing that I would like to mention is that women make essential contributions to agriculture in developing countries, but their roles differ significantly by region and are changing rapidly in some areas. For an example, women comprise on average 43% of the agriculture labor force in developing countries, ranging from 20% in Latin America to 50% in Eastern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And the report also says that women are extremely important as it relates to eradicating hunger, because their contributions are as farmers, agricultural workers, and if we examine their status in terms of poverty, hunger, nutrition, and rural demographics, we see that they are participating in various other things that would relate to making sure that their families are secure, their communities are secure, as well as outside of their personal or household sphere of influence. Specific policies and programs that can close the gender gap in agriculture and rural employment must be looked at. And so we need to focus on interventions that will alleviate constraints on productivity and rural development. And so I give you one example before I leave, that if we look at women in Ghana, they were found to be as efficient as men in agricultural production, but they didn't have the resources that were given to men, and they still were able to have yields, but their yields of food products were lower. They earned lower profits because they were not able to maintain the fertility of their land. As a result of that, people who are disadvantaged in the social and political networks of their villages, like many household heads, are more likely to have their land expropriated if they allow it to remain fallow. So what they do is they tend to keep their land under cultivation continuously. What this does is it erodes soil fertility, and therefore you have products that are not as nutritious as they could be. And there are several studies from Ghana that also confirm that when male and female cocoa producers have the same yields, when they're given the same resources, they can measure, or they are up to the task of not only taking care of their families, but helping to eradicate hunger. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thanks to our panelists for an informative session. If you have a really burning question or two, we'll take them for the panelists. Any takers? Questions? There's one.
I'm able maybe to talk because I live on the involved in an area called East Sheridan, Atlantic City. And so if you were to look at some of the statistics that you were talking about, it's actually closer to us and what we're dealing with. But I must admit that even though I know about freedom land, I really never thought of what you're saying in terms of first thing you have to do is control the land that you got, because you can't grow nothing you don't own unless you just grow it in your home, which is fine. But the reason I brought it up is in this neighborhood that I live in, every other house is vacant. Every house is vacant. There's a vacant lot. So this area is being put in place